When people speak about strange happenings, they often do so with a nervous laugh, as though saying it out loud will make it less real. But there are moments that resist explanation, things that linger in the corner of the mind like a shadow that refuses to vanish when the light comes on. The story of the doll that moved at night is one such moment, a whisper that grew into a question, and then into an unsettling truth that no one wanted to believe. It began quietly, as most unnerving things do. The doll was an antique porcelain face, with glass eyes that caught the faintest glimmer of light, giving them a disconcerting spark even in darkness. It had belonged to someone's grandmother, sitting untouched on a high shelf for decades before it was passed down as a family keepsake. When it arrived at its new home, it was placed gently on a wooden chair in the corner of a guest bedroom, like a fragile relic from another time. It seemed harmless, almost pitiful in its stillness, yet something about its presence drew the eye again and again, as though it were quietly watching. At first, there was nothing unusual. Days passed as they always did, the rhythms of the house undisturbed. But then small things began to shift. One morning, the doll's head was turned slightly to the side. No one admitted to touching it, and no one had any reason to. It could have been dismissed as a trick of memory, and it was. But the next morning, the doll's legs were crossed when they had not been before. The quiet insistence of these changes, however subtle, gnawed at the edges of comfort. A guest staying in that room mentioned waking in the night and feeling as though something was watching her. She had thought it was just her imagination until she saw the doll the next morning sitting not on the chair, but on the windowsill. Everyone laughed when she said this, but the laughter was thin, like something stretched too far. As the nights passed, the disturbances grew bolder. A door left closed was found open. A faint scuff mark appeared on the wooden floor leading away from the chair. Sometimes there was a soft creak of wood in the silence, as though tiny feet were stepping across the boards. The house began to hold its breath at night. Even the air seemed different, heavier somehow, pressing close as though listening. Cameras were suggested, but no one actually installed them, perhaps out of fear that proof would be worse than uncertainty. It was easier to pretend that nothing was happening. Yet pretending only works until reality demands attention. One night, the owner of the house woke from a deep sleep to the distinct sensation that someone was standing near the bed. The darkness felt crowded, thick with unseen movement. She forced herself to turn on the lamp, and there, at the foot of the bed, was a doll, sitting neatly with its hands folded in its lap, its glass eyes catching the light. The chair in the guest room was empty. Panic has a way of distorting time. The moment stretched like a thread pulled to breaking. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. She wanted to move, but her body was stone. The doll did not blink, did not shift. Yet she had the overpowering sense that it was aware, as though something ancient and calculating peered from behind those painted eyes. Gathering all her strength, she snatched it up with trembling hands, stuffed it back in the guest room, and locked the door. but the lock meant nothing. The next morning, the doll was on the dining table. From that point on, the nights became battles of will. The doll was locked in boxes, sealed in closets, even placed in the attic beneath heavy objects. It always returned. Sometimes it would appear in places no one had been in hours, standing upright where it could not have balanced on its own. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no sounds except for the occasional faint scrape that stopped the moment anyone looked. Fear began to eat at the house like rot. Sleep became rare. Conversations grew sharp and whispered. The rational mind clawed for answers. Maybe someone was playing a cruel prank. Maybe the stress was causing hallucinations. But deep down, they all felt it. The doll was not just moving. It was choosing. Each time it appeared, it was a little closer to where people gathered, inching nearer as though testing boundaries. And there was something else, an almost imperceptible change in its expression. Its painted lips seemed to curl just slightly now, an echo of a smile that had not been there before. Its head tilted as if it were listening when they spoke. They tried to get rid of it. They drove miles away and left it at a donation center, but it came back, sitting on the porch the next morning as if it had never left. They buried it in the woods and returned home trembling, only to find it on the living room couch. No matter where it was taken, it found its way back, immaculate and silent. What made it worse was the way it seemed to learn. Doors they thought were secure were found open. Lights they left on at night would be switched off. One night the house's clocks all stopped at exactly 3:07 a.m. The same moment every one of them woke in unison, gasping from the same dream, a cold little hand brushing their cheek. No one spoke of the dream at first, fearing that words would give it more power, but they did not need to. They saw the recognition in each other's eyes. They started sleeping in shifts, keeping watch. Yet even then the doll managed to move when no one saw. It was as if it existed on the edge of perception, slipping through the cracks when attention faltered for even a blink. The tension became unbearable. The house that had once been warm with life was now a cage of dread, every shadow holding the possibility of motion. Finally, in desperation, they called a local priest, who agreed to come though his voice was hesitant on the phone. He stood before the doll, murmuring prayers, sprinkling holy water. The doll did not burn, did not shatter, did not flee. It simply stared, but the air grew colder, and the lights flickered. The priest left quickly, pale and sweating, and said only, "It does not want to be moved." That night, for the first time, the doll spoke. Not with a mouth that moved, but with a voice that slid into the edge of hearing, soft and childlike, whispering from nowhere and everywhere. They could not make out the words, only the tone sweet, coaxing, like a lullaby sung from the bottom of a well. Some covered their ears. Some wept without knowing why. When dawn came, the doll was back in its original chair, as still as the day it arrived, hands folded, eyes empty. And yet they knew something had changed. It had shown them it could move. It had shown them it could follow. Now it had shown them it could wait. Days passed, and it did nothing. But that stillness was worse than movement. It was like watching a predator crouch, patient and certain. Everyone left the house eventually, abandoning it to the silence, leaving the doll alone on its chair, unmoving in the dusty half-light. But those who had lived there carried it with them, not the object itself, but the sense of it, as though its gaze had followed them out into the world. At night, in the stillest hours, some of them swore they could hear the faint creak of tiny steps just beyond the bedroom door, followed by the soft scrape of porcelain across wood.